This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. Each Sunday we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss society, and we explore society so we can discuss principles and the people in America who actually live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, as we approach the 4th of July holiday, it's a great time to get a proper perspective on patriotism and the powerful principles that actually propel it. The principles that founded this nation are just as applicable today as they were to the statesmen, the patriots, the early citizens of this country. Among the mighty principles that shaped America, of course, freedom and liberty, faith and family are vital. Today, we begin this holiday week with a focus on the critical role of civic charity as one of the indispensable principles that shaped and will ultimately preserve us a nation. Someone who has led the charge on re-enthroning civic charity in America is Elder Matthew S. Holland, a General Authority 70 and Executive Director of the Church Communication Department for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Prior to his full-time church service, Elder Holland spent years in rigorous academic research and pursuit to better understand civic charity and how it was deployed in the formation of a constitutional republic here in the United States. His academic honors and accolades are long. His decade at the helm of Utah Valley University as its president proved absolutely transformational, including such legacy projects as the stunning historical stained glass art Roots of Knowledge and a truly unique partnership between Utah Valley University's Center for Constitutional Studies and Oxford Pembroke College's Quill Project. His award-winning book, Bonds of Affection, Civic Charity in the Making of America, I believe should be required reading for every aspiring leader and definitely for every concerned citizen in our country. Elder Holland is also the keynote speaker tonight at the America's Freedom Festival at Provo. Their patriotic service begins tonight. It's free and open to the public. Begins at 7 p.m. at the Marriott Center. Elder Holland, welcome to Sunday Edition.
Thanks so much, Boyd. Delighted to be here.
It will be a big night tonight. Perfect way to frame the 4th of July week, talking about the principles of America. You've done some deep dives into this topic prior to your full-time church service. Give us kind of a baseline when it comes to civic charity. What should we be thinking about?
Well, I think two things. One is it's a concept that has a long history. It's been with us since the very beginning. It was really introduced into the American political consciousness, as you will, by John Winthrop, the first great Puritan leader of New England, and he set the tone by giving a speech called A Model of Christian Charity, and that was his vision for how public life should work in the country. And of course, we've moved away from that, but then it's cascaded on down from him to the likes of Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So it has a long history to it, but it's as timely as ever. I think it's something for the present and the future, and so I'm grateful we have that past.
Yeah, let's go back to John Winthrop, and let's unpack him a little bit.
Sure.
You and I were talking earlier this week about him being one of the forgotten patriots, maybe one of the greatest patriots when it comes to words and really defining this kind of civic charity.
You know, people often ask me, what's the best book ever written about America? And I say, the best book ever written about America is written by a Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America. And he made the argument that he thought he could see all of America in the first Puritan, and by that he meant John Winthrop. He gives a tribute to him and a couple of his speeches and the way that he conceived of the love that would be needed, the ability to mix a religious life with a civic life. Now, of course, we've moved away from a number of those puritanical principles, but he really had some profound things to say that have had lasting impact, and that's why I think someone as thoughtful and capacious as Alexis de Tocqueville saw John Winthrop as really the first founder of America's political tradition.
And you talked about the fact that Winthrop both had the words and the principles, but he also had to wrestle with the real application and where those kind of bump up in forming a great nation.
Well, that's been the area that I've always been most intrigued by, is the folks who are really wrestling with the theory, the philosophy, the values of politics, but in a real world way. This wasn't just an academic exercise, but he's incredibly thoughtful and theological and theoretical, and yet he brings it into real life, and it's that kind of mix of theory and practice that really comes to the fore with someone like Winthrop.
Yeah. One of the others that you get to is talking about Thomas Jefferson and his application. We talk about contentious political seasons and seasons of unrest in the nation. Jefferson's election and ultimate swearing in was one that was depicted by a lot of the newspapers of the day. Many were saying that they feared that this would lead to a riot or another revolution, and he chose a very different path.
He did, and I think it's to his everlasting credit and to the good of the nation that this moment that could have been so divisive and really left a rupture in the fledgling republic, we survived. We got through it, and it's because he stood up and was informed by Christian charity. He had a little different view of it than John Winthrop, and he had his own kind of take, but he was really looking at New Testament principles when he stood up and invited all of us to, or at least the countrymen of his day, if you will, to reach out with affection to their fellow citizens and to see themselves as, while wearing a different party stripe, brethren and sisters of the same principle, as he put it, and that would be grounded in a bond of affection driven by this kind of love that he was reading about in the New Testament. And it changed the tone of the speech, the launch of his administration, and it brought people back together, including ultimately his friendship with John Adams, which had been ruptured through the course of that ugly campaign.
Yeah, very ugly campaign. And I always loved that Jefferson had this focus on making sure we never mistake a difference in policy approach to a difference in principle, that we can have those big disagreements. I think that's part of the founding of the nation. And yet, it's that ability, those bonds of affection, that civic charity that leads us back to, here's what we're all trying to solve. You may have a different view of it. I may not understand why you think this is better policy than this, but we still move forward together in the process.
That's right. That's right.
So as we continue to look at this and move it forward, I think one of the other components that is really interesting, I want to get into Lincoln a little bit before we take a break. Give us kind of a baseline in terms of his application of civic charity, especially early on.
For Lincoln?
Yeah.
So Lincoln, like many of these figures, goes through a journey himself. I think as a young man, Lincoln was more of a rationalist, and don't know exactly. It's harder to get a read on where he was religiously as a younger man. But over the course of his life, especially during the presidency and some of the trauma that he went through and the difficulty, he really comes to wrestle with God, with the Bible, with faith, with prayer in a really profound way, so that by the end of his presidency, some would argue he's the most religious president, certainly the most theologically sophisticated president we've ever had. And so that then marks where I think civic charity comes in a most profound and pronounced way. There are elements of it all throughout his candidacy and his life as a politician, but it picks up more and more of a religious, biblical flavor to it as he goes on in life.
We're going to stay with that part of the conversation when we come back here on Sunday Edition on KSL 5 TV. Again, we're staying with Elder Matthew Holland, General Authority 70 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and keynote speaker tonight at the Freedom Festival Patriotic Service at the Marriott Center, open to the public, starts at 7 p.m. We'll pick up the conversation when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We're staying with the question and the conversation with Elder Matthew S. Holland, General Authority 70 and Executive Director of the Communications Department for the Church of Jesus Christ. He's the keynote speaker tonight at the Freedom Festival in Provo. Starts at 7 p.m. at the Marriott. It is open to the public. And as we stay with the conversation around these core principles, I want to stay with Lincoln. We talked about just before the break, and you talked about the role of faith in his life. Kind of that arc is such an interesting thing. The further he went along, the more reflective he seemed to become. Talk to us a little bit, just from your deep dive research of Lincoln. What is it that you learn about his principles that really animated the things he was able to accomplish?
Well, it was all very deeply genuine, and I think that's come out more as time goes on and history probes more his life, and you see the private side of him come through. This was not a political stunt. This was a man who was wrestling very deeply with moral, theological, ethical demands that he thought were placed upon him, even as the President of the United States. And that's what you just see, I think, building and building for him. He was always ambitious, always seeking. I think he always had this thirst and for office, but especially during those presidential years, he wants to do the right thing. And for him, a lot of that was religiously motivated, but there were, as you say, also just principles. There were ethics, and for him, it all became part of a whole that was very fundamental to who he was.
Yeah. I always say that you don't really know what you think about something until you force yourself to actually write it down. Yeah. And I think one of the most interesting ways to look at Lincoln, he understood words, as you do. Words have meaning, and the meaning matters. And he was really one of the last presidents in America to do most of his communicating with the people through written word. What was the impact of that, and how do you think that helped shape what he did, not only in speeches, but as he actually tried to lead the nation?
Well, it's a great question. I think it operates at two levels. I think for him, writing was thinking, as it is or should be for most of us, and he really did. He was able to capture things in an essence and with a poetry, because he was willing to put things down on paper and have that be the written word. But in the process, he also changed the language. He was part of a shift. If you compare his speeches to those that go before him, he was still of an age when people were taking their cues from the Greeks and the Romans and the flowery oratory, and he came through with a kind of a new American language that was more spare, simple, direct, and yet still somehow poetic, Shakespearean at the same time. So it's really a remarkable accomplishment, and it's why some of his texts, like the Gettysburg Address and others, still remain in many people's minds the high watermark of simply an expression of the English language, whatever they may mean substantively.
Yeah, so interesting. We were quoting former Ambassador Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, and she talked about the fact that great leaders can't just look the other way, but they shape the future. And I think when it came to language and words, Lincoln really did shape the language and ultimately shape the trajectory of the country.
Absolutely. I think it helped that he was in this crucible moment, and so attention was focused, and the big ideas were at stake, and he was able to take that and channel those things through the medium of his poetry and his prose, and then informed by not just logic, but spirit and emotion and theology and the things of the spirit and the soul, if you will.
Yeah, I want to pull that thread all the way through from Winthrop, Jefferson, and Lincoln. You talk about that spirit, that faith, those animating principles. We live in a time where faith has been kind of nudged out of the public square in a lot of ways, not just here in America, but around the world. What should we be thinking about when it comes to religious liberty and people being able to bring their whole authentic self into the public square?
Well, it's a great question. You know, if you start with Winthrop, I always say about Winthrop is he made democracy possible, but also necessary. So he laid the groundwork, some of the character and the virtues that have been so helpful to us. But that kind of puritanic fusion of the church and the state, so rigid and so thick, was sort of insufferable. No one wanted to live like that. Yeah. And so you needed someone like Jefferson to come to say, we're gonna separate these things a little bit more, and there will be a realm for the civic and the governmental, and there'll be a realm for the private and the religious. But what's interesting about Jefferson is that changes over time. He's sometimes read as this person who recommends this radical separation and this high wall of separation. And the part that we were talking about earlier, in this moment of the 1800 election, he turns to religion in his first inaugural address and sees that as a resource that has to be part of the solution here. So even someone like Jefferson comes to see we have to have religion as a resource in the public square. We just have to treat it carefully so that we don't establish a religion on one hand and we don't infringe on the rights of other people to practice their religion.
Yeah, just in our last minute here, give us a sense in your ministry as you interact with government leaders, interfaith leaders from around the world. What is it that we should be thinking about when it comes to religious liberty and how important a role that is in society?
Well, I think that more and more, I think people of faith need each other. I think looking to spend maybe less time focusing on the things that divide us and the things that unite us. When it comes to religion, there's a lot of history with these things and feelings are very intense, but there's so much at stake and we need to be in concert and dialogue with each other. But it's not just with others of faith. Yeah. We need to cast a big, broad net, and I think that's what you see the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doing, is that this is our way of, we've got to find ways to accommodate people that we disagree with. Yeah. And that if we can do that and enshrine and protect and further religious liberty at the same time, that's a path forward for us that works in our current environment.
Yeah, fantastic. Elder Matthew S. Holland, thanks so much for joining us today. Great insight as always. You can hear him tonight at the Patriotic Service at the Marriott Center at 7 p.m. And we'll be back with more Sunday Edition coming up next here on KSL 5 TV. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. As you approach your Independence Day celebration of barbecues, fireworks, and summer fun, I would add that in relationship to our freedoms in this nation, that it is important to remember that the things we ignore or forget, our children may never know. And what our children do not know, our grandchildren may never possess. Freedom is fragile when the principles are forgotten. The Declaration of Independence we celebrate on July 4th is a defining document that sparked the pursuit of liberty and fanned the flame of freedom here in America. The document itself is primarily a detailed list of all the grievances the colonists had against King George and the British Crown. Yet in the midst of the litany of complaints, the phrase, "all men are created equal," makes a stunning and transcendent appearance. The Declaration of Independence and that declaration within the Declaration launched a national, soul-conflicting conversation that actually continues today. It isn't a question of the sincerity of the statement or the verity of the values. Rather, the question is how to bring our individual and national behavior into alignment with the ideas we profess and believe about equality and a host of other principles that truly matter to the nation. I'm convinced that it was not an accident, but divine design that all men are created equal was inserted into the Declaration of Independence. The world wants us to look on our differences as a reason for division, rather than seeing our diversity as a divine blessing and a strength to our democracy and constitutional republic. Some cynics are attempting to undermine the very founding principles of America. They make the case that the founding fathers who declared these ideals were flawed and not living congruently or aligned with what they declared in our nation's founding documents. Such an approach recognizes the pain of the misalignment of behavior with principle, but doesn't create space for alignment and elevation of thought or performance to actually occur over time. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught that the better angels of our nature and a divine discontent inherently spur us to bring our professed beliefs and our daily walk into alignment. The history of nations pursues a similar path. As King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Justice itself is an alignment or a balance of the demands of justice and human mercy. This week there will be numerous speeches delivered on and countless references to the Declaration of Independence, and rightly so. It is the 4th of July after all. And this declarative document galvanized a people and fueled a historic movement toward liberty and freedom. Such a declaration of God-given rather than government-granted rights was powerful and important. Over time, it actually is what doesn't have to be declared that makes America a beacon of hope and a true leader among freedom-loving and freedom-seeking people the world over. The mantra, if you have to declare it, you aren't it, is true for individual leaders as well as nations. For example, when a teenager declares, I'm an adult, it's usually because they're about to do something very childish or foolish. If a person has to declare that they are the bold, brash leader, they really aren't the leader. Leaders who declare by their actions who they are and what they believe are more to be believed than those who have to try to declare it and thus attempt to convince you who they are and what they believe. You see, quiet confidence is the ultimate sign of both wisdom and strength in leadership. Legendary college football coach Lou Holtz was famous for emphasizing this kind of quiet, non-declarative leadership with his players. When players got to the end zone and scored a touchdown, he told them to act like they had been there before. When players made a great tackle or catch, he told them to not beat their chests and draw attention, but act like they expected that result. No declaration required, just action and real results. So what does this have to do with the 4th of July celebration and the Declaration of Independence? I think it has everything to do with it. Americans do not need to declare greatness to the world. Just live the principles of liberty and freedom. America doesn't need to declare its might or strength by parading tanks or brandishing military hardware on the National Mall. America's strength is not found in the fact that the nation has developed such weapons. It's actually in the exercise of restraint as to when those weapons are deployed. Service women and men are to be celebrated for their quiet confidence, for the way they carry out their duty and defend freedom without bombast, without hype or declaration. They simply know the principles they represent bless all who live in this country. I think Teddy Roosevelt got it right when he said that the best way was to speak softly and carry a big stick. This is the ultimate strength. Hope for America has nothing to do with which politician is declaring they are the leader, which political party controls the Congress, who's sitting on the Supreme Court, or who's occupying the Oval Office. It has everything to do with who's sitting in the living rooms, classrooms, waiting rooms, and community meeting rooms of this country. The magic of America is not housed in the halls of Congress, memorialized in a majestic monument, displayed in military might, or stored in a secure vault somewhere. The magic of America is found within ordinary people who do, rather than declare, extraordinary things every day. The neighbor helping a neighbor in need, the teacher staying late to help a struggling student, the friend intently listening to a tale of heartbreak, the professional providing free service to solve a problem, the child standing up to a bully for a classmate. These heroic citizens are the thread with which strong neighborhoods and vibrant communities are actually woven. On July 4th, it is important for all of us to remember that America is great not by what we declare, but by what each of us actually do in the end. And that's the story of America. That's the things that we need to be looking for as we look at this July 4th week. It's not about declaring that America is great. It's living it and showing that we are great. As de Tocqueville rightly said, America is great because she is good. If she ceases to be good, she'll cease to be great. No declaration required. Well, that wraps it up for us on Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.